Hello, welcome to this Love Fools episode. I am really excited. I'm still unpicking this question that was posed to me last week, and I have been really trying to understand the answer and explore the answer in the different ways it can affect us. So the question is this: why can't people change? More specifically, why can't people make a conscious change? And why do we fail even when we know it's good for us or it's what we want to do? And there's so many reasons that can answer this question, right? But I'm answering from the perspective of us as humans and as a system, as an individual system, and how we operate and function as a human, but then also how we operate in connection with other people and the world around us. Now, I've already done 2 episodes talking about this, the answer in this question. Okay, so we've already explored how as what might happen within us as individuals that will cause this to happen, which will cause us to not be able to reach a goal, or to give up, or to fail, or to miss out, or to lose momentum, whatever it is. Okay, I've already explored how our individual, how we stop this happening within ourselves. And I've already explored how other people can impact our progress when we set a goal or try to make a change. I've already explored them in the previous episodes. So if you're interested in hearing a bit more about them, go and listen to the previous episodes. You don't have to do it straight away. You can listen to this one first if you want, or you can go off and listen to them, come back, whatever you want. This episode is about how our environment, how the world around us, how external factors can influence this dynamic of humanity. How others, but more so rather than another individual, how the collective of everything, how life, how society, how our world, how does that play a part in us not being able to meet our goals? And it can be a really big part. And it's very, very easy to decide that, oh, well, I'm not affected by other people, or I don't let the world affect me, or I make my choices and I'm independent, when the reality is that's not the whole truth, that everything is connected. We are all connected as a humanity, which I spoke about in the last episode, about how we move as humanity. But everything is connected. All of life is connected. So beyond just how we move as a humanity, and yes, that needs to be considered in the answer to this question in relation to how we move in the world. But actually, we're also part of a wider world. We're part of the earth. We're part of earthlings and all the beings that are interacting on the planet. I mean, let's face it, even the weather can scoop at our plans sometimes. It can make it more challenging. If you've decided, I'm going to start running, so it's really good for my health, and then it rains for 4 days, it can get really tiring really quickly. That's just a fun little example, but it's valid, okay? The world impacts our conscious choices because we're affected. We're part of it. We're affected by it. It affects us. We affect it. But there's so much to unpack in this section. And this is a little bit where I can get really into this, if you like, okay? Because I think we live in this juxtaposition where the current society where we live in, and I'm talking from a Western capitalist society. I am from Britain, very much. I'm in the north of England. So we have our own challenges in relation to where we're placed in the world. We're in the north of England. But most people understand, I think, English culture, and especially that ideology, because it's rippled out around the world, because, yes, people from this place colonized the world and caused all sorts of ripple effect, and that affected all sorts of people's lives and their plans for a very long time. But I think there's this juxtaposition in that society that's been created, which is that we're independent, which is not really true, that we can define our own life. which is a part truth. We can choose to change our direction, to choose our own life, but we don't choose where we're born, where our place is in humanity. We don't choose where that flow and where that stream is dragging us or taking us naturally in relation to our birthplace and the people and the, that we're connected to it with, and how we are brought up and how our DNA responds to life and all that stuff. We don't get to choose. We can then make a change, right? So this is what I'm saying. We can choose to change, but change is hard unless we are changing with the flow. If we're trying to make that conscious change into a new direction, that is the most challenging thing we can do as humans. It takes a phenomenal amount of energy and you get very little instant reward for doing that. In fact, you tend to be moving into conflict. You tend to be moving into some sort of discomfort. You're moving into the unknown, which goes against everything that keeps us safe and alive in our programming as humans. So we have this juxtaposition where we've created a society that's supposed to make it easier for us to function and provide protection and security. And it's our society has also created this idea that within that society, you are free to move and do as you want, do as you will. But it's not quite the full reality of the situation, is it? I talked in the previous episode a little bit about a metaphor of humanity as a river. And I like to use that little metaphor, and I'm going to stick with it. It's just how I see it in my head. So it's really hard for me not to use those terms. But if you can stick with me a little bit on that metaphor, that humanity, we're all connected to each other within the wider world, we take up our own shape, we have our own responses as a collective. And yes, as individuals, we make up part of that movement. But society is the shape that it provides for us to move within, okay? Society is setting the boundary and the container for which we can move as part of humanity. And moving out of that is really risky. It's really risky. It's really rare, because actually you're then stepping outside of society. You're stepping outside the security of this that's been provided and all the momentum and energy that's gone into that. You think of just how much energy has gone into creating the society as we know it, all of the energy that's gone in, the human energy, that is a massive, massive stream of consciousness that is happening. And to step out of that is monumental. It takes a lot of effort, okay? So there's a little bit to unpack within that, right? Because society is what shapes that mainstream, that container for us to flow within if we're a human operating within society. As you get to the edges, obviously, like I say, there's more risk there. You've got more freedom to move, perhaps, but you don't have as much protection, and it's a lot harder if you're born into a mainstream to move out of that, especially when you might not see the benefit of doing so, even if it's causing damage and harm along the way to you, okay? But there's, depending what, obviously, when we're talking about setting a goal, right? When I'm talking about this question, I've talked about it a couple of times as like a crisis point. We don't make a change for ourselves unless we hit some sort of crisis point, unless we realize, I really need to make a change, or this is going to happen. There's a potential disaster ahead and I need to change and divert, okay? For that to happen, like I say, it has to be something significant. And depending what's caused that can depend on our response to it. And what's really interesting at the minute is we've created a pretty firm, solid container of society, but it's getting weaker and weaker and weaker because people can't move within that society as much as they would like. Because of that, because people are trying to move and shaking things up, what tends to happen is the powers that be, the government and stuff, make things tighter, right? They try to direct the flow in order to make things easier for us to move as a collective, but that makes the conditions even more stressful for those moving within the flow. And that can actually cause the crisis points that cause people to want to change. So if that crisis point has been in your life that caused you to want to be changed, has been caused by the tightness and the pressure of the mainstream, when you come out of there, you might not necessarily want to get back into it. Okay. And this can be one of the reasons why we fail at making a change, or more so that we can potentially make a big change, move out of that, gain some perspective, and then not want to re-engage with that initial flow, because we kind of have to be in the initial flow for us to reach a lot of the goals that we set for ourselves. I should probably explain that. A lot of the goals that we set for ourselves involve connection with other people. They involve finding some sort of level of security or stability. They involve us having more protection, having better health, being stronger and fitter and healthier. And all of these things can come from, or were found in for us originally in the mainstream. And if we make all the effort to move out of that, which you often have to do, okay, to make a change, like I say, you have to move out of that. We've kind of looked a little bit into that in the previous episodes. And that takes a lot of effort. If you then get out of that, there's a big question about how am I then going to reach my goal, which is still downstream, but now I'm on the outsides. Now I've made a move and I'm not connected in the same way. So I've got to try and forge my way, maybe alongside the mainstream, which is really, really challenging. And so that can mean we often end up slipping back into our old patterns, into our old ways of being, because it's easier, because it's what we know, because it's not quite as challenging as being out on our own. And this I find really interesting, because if our environment was open, okay, if society was open, if we didn't have this structure, people would have more room to move, okay? There would probably be more flow within it, but we wouldn't be as fundamentally protected. Things wouldn't be as easy to direct and understand, because things would be moving all over the place and there'd be more movement and people could move, but we're not actually then offered as much protection by society. And society wants to perpetuate itself. Like I say, it's been putting a lot of effort into creating that structure. But what I find really interesting is the boundary that has been used to create our society, and how we've gone a little bit, more than a little bit, quite a lot of a bit, off the point of it. Because if the point of creating this structure and security of society is to allow people to be able to flow through life better, to have more protection, security, all these lovely benefits we would like from being connected with other people, they need room to move. They need to be able to move in their own way. And as we remove that, we actually create more stress. We create more stress on the individuals, and we create more of these crisis points where people feel more of a need to move drastically. It creates choppy waters, if you like, because people are desperately trying to move out of the way because of these crisis points coming up, because they feel trapped, contained. And then that crisis point can be manifestation in many ways, you know, because I'm talking about like goal setting and what we might set goals for in a crisis point. It might be a physical crisis for our health and well-being. It might be a relationship crisis. It might be a financial crisis, a career crisis, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But the direction of society that it is pushing us in a certain way might have contributed to that crisis. And even if it's just a little bit, if the mainstream's going off that way and you're wanting to go that way, suddenly you're like, oh, I'm over here and I wanted to be over there. So you've got to do a radical shift to move back. And then you realize that because the mainstream's going there, that's so far out of where I'm actually heading, it can cause a lot of stress, is what I'm saying. And in this whole thought process and everything I've had over unpacking the answer to this question this week, I posed this other question, which I find really interesting, because like I say, a lot of these crisis points that we create are actually created because we are following the flow, because we're trying to go along with society, because we're trying to fit in, and because we're trying to be good, and because we're trying to be helpful to the collective. It actually creates more of these crisis points. So why, as a collective, are we putting people in situations where following the mainstream makes them ill? That's a really big question. Why are we doing that? And I could go off on one for a very long time about all the reasons why I think we are doing that, and some people are intentionally potentially doing that, how we are maybe unintentionally doing that. But it's a really important question. Why are we forcing people into situations where the mainstream makes them ill or makes a crisis point? We're moving off course. And that force of us moving off course can cause a lot of tension, a lot of stress, and symptoms to manage, which can be all different kinds of crisis points, right? And one thing that I found really interesting, so I'm going to just relay this goal set into a health and well-being goal for this example, is if you want to be well, okay, your crisis has been a health crisis. You were following along, doing everything based on all the information you've learned and gathered from the people and situations around you. You've been going along, and you've followed what we consider over here in England to be a traditional life. You've been working, you've got a couple of kids and a family, you're paying bills, right? But actually that has led you to have a complete overwhelm, burnout, breakdown, okay? You've had a health crisis, mental, physical, spiritual. Your life is in crisis and you want to change. You have to change, right? So you go off course. You go find your way out of that flow because you need to rest and change. Now, that space is traditionally supposed to, what we set up in our society is supposed to be provided by Social Security, we called it. And I've seen this really interesting ad for freelancer insurance, right? For freelancer and self-employed. I'm self-employed, so it was like something that came into my, was obviously intentionally targeted at me. And they were advertised that you pay into this insurance, and if you get ill, you get between 50 and 70% of your income back. Somebody posed the question, why do you only get 50, 70% of your income back? They responded with, and I thought this was genius. Now, this is an insight into how a lot of our society is run, okay? This is quite important, this insight. They replied with, well, this is what's called a moral dilemma. Very patronizing of the company. I'm not going to advertise who the company is, because we wouldn't want to pay someone 100% of what they were earning if they're ill, because then there would be no incentive to return to work. Wow. And I think that is a fundamental belief, and then our belief is creating these directions that we want to flow, right? Our driving forces. Our belief is like, I want to head there and I believe we can. And that's creating the momentum of these streams. And I just thought, wow, what a thing to say. So my response was, do you not think that being well is incentive enough to heal? They didn't reply. Still waiting for a reply for them for that. But it got me thinking, because I've had some pretty interesting, I've supported people through some situations with Social Security. I have my own situations I've had to navigate with regards to Social Security, and how and why that is provided, right? And how they dish that out. And like I say, I could go on. I'm going to be doing a lot of writing about this, so I could go on and on and on about it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try and be as clear as possible for this show. But it just highlights a really big overlooming idea that is creating this container of society that we all try functioning, which is creating these crisis points, which is that we need to be working, we need to be putting effort in, we need to be keeping things going, creating momentum, blah, blah, blah. And yes, we do need to do that. We do need to keep moving and stuff. But if all we're expected to do is move and move and never rest and never respond to ourselves as humans, that's pushing us closer and closer to crisis points, right? And then when we need to take that space, we don't want to hold people in that space. We don't want them to be well and moving, because we have this underlying belief that if people are well, they won't want to move forward, that they won't want to work. And wow, that just blows my mind that there's this whole culture around not wanting to support people in a crisis point, not wanting to support people to achieve their goals, to better their life, because then they want to contribute to this stream that's leading us all to more crisis points. Well, no, of course not. Of course they won't. But what is really interesting, though, is that once you're healed and well, you do still want to move, because it's a natural want and desire of ours, of all of nature. But the difference that I've noticed between nature and humans is that nature's very happy with just doing what I need to survive, right? And by just doing what I need to survive, that aspect of nature tends to thrive. Now, the external circumstances can obviously affect that. So depending on how tough the external circumstances are, just what I need to survive can be varying amounts of effort. Okay, it can be real varying amounts of effort. But we add so much more as humans, because we have to decide on things like, do I deserve to have this? Am I right to have this? Is it the decent thing and the right thing to do, to follow this stream, to have this thing that I want when actually it's going in a different direction? Am I deserving enough to have this? Who am I to change the direction? All these things, these ideas that we have, stop us from moving because we don't want to create a dangerous environment. Is this all making sense? I don't know if I've maybe gone off on one a little bit here. But our adoption of that into society is to keep people in this survival mode, right? Because if we decide, if people have that little bit of fear, right, a little bit of a panic to move, and I discussed this in the first episode, that when we've got that panic, we can make big shifts, we can move, right? And that's kind of what Western society is built on, making big shifts and big moves in this direction, when actually we could slowly be meandering in a very different way if we wanted to be. We don't have to always be moving with so much energy and bouncing off each other, and you know, having to reach rock bottom and bouncing back to gain some momentum, and all of this way that we strive to be productive, basically drowning in this choppy water in humanity as part of society. We don't have to do that. But because that's what's been accepted as work, and this kind of weird shadow idea that we have, that this struggle or this idea of working makes us stronger or more deserving or more able to navigate more responsibility, more edges of society, whatever it is, it just causes us harm. And we've added that layer. We've added that layer of struggle onto our existence, and that can really, really stop us from following our path, following the change in direction that we've wanted, the goals that we've set to move us away from this crisis point. Because this fundamental idea that you need to be denied happiness in order to move towards it, to keep moving in and keeping us moving as humanity in a direction towards happiness, if you like, has caused the stressful situation that we're in. And it's a very, very strange idea, I think. I think it comes from like a deep-rooted fear that if we're not moving, if we're not pushing each other to move, if we're not clambering on top of each other and forcing each other all in different directions to create this, you know, high energy movement of humanity as we go, that we won't just flow, and that if everyone's just going in different directions, that will be aimless, that will be too much chaos, you know, to control. But it's a very different kind of chaos, and it's the chaos of nature. So nature tends to move in that way. So the reality is that nature, our real external environment, the earth, is very dangerous. It's a very risky place because everything is just moving as it needs to survive. It creates a much more dynamic, complex way of moving. It's much more open. And that's what society is trying to do, right? Is to create the protection and structure to make that not quite so scary. But actually, because it's become so tight now, the scariness is the fact that we're all being crushed in this mainstream, right? And everyone's desperately trying to get out of it, desperately just trying not to drown as we go over top of each other. We've gone too far, we've squeezed too far. But yeah, the reality is that nature is very complex and anything can happen in nature. Just part of the reason why we follow these patterns and we follow these flows and we kind of go with our instincts and we move with the energy. And that's what nature does. That's what animals do in the wild. You know, they don't try to fight like we do. They kind of accept more of their place. But still, I mean, it's complex because animals will follow the crowd of other animals. They'll follow their collective consciousness towards a goal. But that goal generally is for everyone to be well fed and have the shelter and protection that they need. They're generally all moving in the same direction. Whereas I think that's where we've got a little bit off in our society. If the direction that we're heading is just keep on going, as opposed to finding some sort of peace and protection, I think that's a very different vibe. And I think that's maybe potentially where we've gotten a little bit confused. But bringing it back to the original question, like, why do people feel? Why can't people keep up with their change if they're changing direction? Because the pressure can be immense of the mainstream, and the lack of protection can make you incredibly vulnerable. And that is a massive, massive influence on people's lives, is the shape of the options that we create for people in society. And it is kind of becoming a bit now like, well, either you conform with this really rough ride or you just get left out in the cold and die, which is potentially what is being often like imposed on people. And it's like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be left out on the cold by myself and abandoned to die. But I also don't want to be dragged into this horrific drowning mess of humanity where everybody's scrambling all over each other and nobody really knows what's going on. We want neither of those things. We want our own flow, right? Where we're within the safe container and we're moving in a way where we feel protected and safe. But if that's not possible, if that feels impossible, if that the amount of energy that it's taken to drive your particular stream either out of the mainstream or into this wilderness of being outside of the mainstream, the effort is huge. And it can be so much easier to just get dragged back into the safety and the security of our past experiences, what we know, of the literally the physical financial security provided by the mainstream. You know, if we don't have that, it leaves us utterly vulnerable, and kind of the system knows that, and that's how it directs us in a certain way. What I find really interesting, and of most of my conversations, because I am a solution focused, I love to design systems that work in harmony with nature. I like to understand this, so I understand how we can make systems that work better in harmony with nature. And actually, what we need to do at the minute, I think, is to just shift the direction of that mainstream, open it up. Stop putting so much pressure on it. Like, this is, you know, what it means to be human, and allow much more freedom. We will give the people will move, yes, but it definitely won't be as choppy and scary. You won't have these big waves up and down and, like I say, drowning each other. We need to open it up and allow people much more freedom and support round the edges, who want to try something differently, who aren't supported by the mainstream, if we open up that arm of support and create a bigger container that will actually find much more peace. People are often scared of that because they think that's going to be creating chaotic. If you give people more room to move, they're going to take up more room and move, right? And people are terrified of that. Give people less room to move. They're still going to move. They're just going to move in a very different way. And that's what we've created at the minute, where people are moving in a very stressful way at the minute, trying, because we're aware of all these crisis points going on. We're aware we need to move, but we can't because it feels so tight. And actually what we need to do as a society is loosen up that control, still provide the structure and the support that we want and need from each other, but in a much more open way. And that's what's going to be the most radical shifts, I think, that we need, because it's really healthy for people to be moving in the direction that they want to move, in the way they want to move. That's what creates a healthy ecosystem. That's what creates a healthy, diverse ecosystem. And I understand that, because that is what creates a healthy, diverse ecosystem in the world, in a garden, in a nature reserve, whatever it is. And we are much the same. So if we're trying to make a change, and we are wanting to embrace that change, it needs to be provided for us as well in a much more open, structured way in society. And it's not. And so a lot of people can blame themselves or the other people around them for their failure, if you like, not being able to make a change, not being able to reach the goals that they want for their health and well-being. But if we're not being supported by the environment we're creating for ourselves, then there literally is no point. Like, if somebody is better off and gets more support being sick or being in a slightly, not in the situation they want to be in, but that situation at least has some sort of security, they'll stay there, because it would just be absurd not to. And it would be, and another thing as well is, if someone's been here in the middle of the mainstream and they've had to move out because of a crisis point, and they're now in this kind of like side stream or something that's really tight and stressful, they don't want to go back. They don't want to go back to the mainstream. They actually want to move out again, but they can't. If there's the brick wall there, if you can't move out and there's a brick wall, then, well, I'll just stay there. Then I'll just stay in this new stream, even if it's not benefit us, because I definitely don't want to go back, because I know where I was going back was heading me off this cliff to my crisis point. So all of this needs to be taken into consideration when we're trying to make a change for ourselves, when we're trying to understand love and connection, our self-love, how we love others, how we love the environment, and how that affects us and how we move. I've really, really enjoyed unpicking this subject, this question, and I'm going to actually do a little bit of a roundup episode where I'm going to just talk a little bit about everything we've covered, because I think it's been quite a lot. I really appreciate you listening, and if you've been watching on YouTube, hello. If you didn't know, this is also going to be available over on YouTube, so you can go and have a little look. If you're curious about me and what I look like. I don't know, each to their own. Very, very happy to have you listening, and I've loved having you as part of this Love Fools episode. Join me again for the next episode, and I'm going to summarize the past 3 episodes, and let's see what we think about the complexity and how much of a hero you have to be to actually make a change in your life. I think that's what I'm going to talk about in the next episode. I will see you then. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Fools, where we have been exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you as part of Love School, where we explore what it means to love self, others, and everything. For more information, come and have a look at our site, www.loveschool.uk.